Have you ever looked at an old historical fencing manual and found a move that you thought was really cool and thought, I understand what's going on here?
You're wrong.
Yeah, and today we're gonna tell you why. So I think a lot of people think of these manuals as like a how-to book, and they could just pick it up and leaf through the pages and learn how to fence. Is that correct?
So that is true in a sense, and it was understood that a lot of these manuals are written towards people who already had a basic understanding of like how to move their bodies, how to operate a sword, how to fence, how to ride a horse, how to grapple, how to do anything like that. And part of the issue that we run into as coaches is teaching people who have never fenced a day in their life, but also teaching them historical fencing simultaneously. And so what a lot of people will do is they'll read through a book and they'll attempt to perform something and they realize that they can't do it. And so they will either discount the move instead of looking inward and deciding that they just need to get better at something, and they'll discount the move, or they'll discount the book, or they'll discount the whole manual for them and everybody else.
Another thing that comes up a lot is that I think that we don't have some of the contexts that would have been going into these things. They're like, you read through this dense thing and there's just stuff we don't understand.
Yeah, so there's a lot of things like in this modern culture, a lot of entertainment is driven by memes that are layers and layers and layers deep that we look at and we immediately recognize as a reference on top of a reference. But 100 years from now, when someone sees that exact same image that we laugh at now, people are going to look at that and wonder, they have no idea what that means. And in the same way, in the same way, we scroll through like Fiore here and we see a picture of this Signo, and this is pretty cool. But unless, I didn't exist at the time that this was made, to me this is just a guy with some swords going through him and a few animals here. But to a noble from the time period, they would immediately recognize this as a callback to a really famous painting called The Seven Sorrows of Mary. And that's something that they would have immediately made the connection with, and they would have immediately understood this in a different context than I do. And in order for me to understand it in the same context as them, I have to do more than just read this fencing manual. I have to look at outside history of both art and of the nobility and of the culture of the time.
So what about, like, who was using these manuals? Was the average soldier who could pick this up and look through it?
So Fiore makes a big deal to talk about that this is a secret, and he doesn't mean you don't go around telling people. He's basically saying, this is something that the nobles share and we don't tell the dirty peasants. And the dirty peasants, as nice as he can, he basically says that people are made for a specific purpose. We were made to be nobles, they were made to be workers, and we don't mix, we don't share. And so this was made to be taught to people of the nobility, soldiers who were of a certain rank within the nobility. And from that time in medieval Europe, the nobility is different than what you think of. It was still very much a feudal system, but they didn't have standing militaries. They had mercenary bands known as the condottieri. And Fiore was one of these condottieri. He was a captain. And they were little mercenary groups that would go around and be hired out to fight private wars for different rich nobles that made their fortunes with the Crusades and the trade between the Italian ports and the Middle Eastern ports.
So we mentioned kind of the symbolism and the layering of these kind of like memes of the olden days. Can you talk any more about any of that?
Yeah, so a lot of people get really hung up on the actual artistic depiction of what they see in the drawings, especially like in the Fiore, the original Paris. And people talk about, well, you see his foot, is his foot doing this? Is his foot turned this way? Why are all the swords always flat? And you ask yourself these questions and think, oh, should we always bind with the flat? Why does he show his finger around the guard one time? Why does he show his thumb up on the blade? Like in a more German system, why? And we don't know the answer to those questions. What we do know is that a lot of the art that he depicts mirrors at the time religious imagery. One of the most famous paintings of the time is Jesus carrying the cross up the mountain, and he's depicted as holding his cross like this on his shoulder and looking back kind of like this. And posted it on a destra is shown in the same way like this. And it's meant to be a symbolism between the two, like, that's something that I recognize. That's a position that I recognize. And I know that because of extra research. But if someone just picked up the manual and saw that position, then they're only going to have the most basic rudimentary understanding of why does Fiore depict it in such a dramatic way. Well, he's depicting the art style from the time. And just picking up the manual with no prior knowledge, you'd never be able to know something like that.
So it's not necessarily that he's telling you to throw it from back here. He's telling you it's part of the beam. Yeah,
so the guard positions and the attacks themselves are concepts. He wants you to have your sword in this position, some kind of position in this way, and you throw your cut out to long or all the way through with a step. And that's what's important about that thing. It's not that, oh, well, we're here and you really should be here, or we're here and we really should be here, or we're like this. None of that matters. What matters is that we're somewhere over in this position and we throw our cut. That's the important thing that Fiore is trying to get across. And arguing about the semantics of, oh, it's really kind of this way, is a waste of everybody's time.
So one of the things that we've brought up already and that I hear actually often is the idea that the art style of the time could lead to misinterpretations of what's going on.
Yeah, so one of the most common ones is you see a lot of the plays, they stand really close to each other, their tips are up, not in presence, and they bind with their flats like this. And you think, oh, is this how we're supposed to fence? Well, he says in the manual to bind with your edge and to hit, strike with your edge, whereas if I strike with the flat, it does nothing. So you have to think, okay, so is the picture wrong or are the words wrong? And we always err on the side of the words are what Fiore wrote and the pictures are what the scribes from the drawing or scribe guild that he hired. The way art was done in the time that he did, that he wrote his manual and he had his manual scribed out for him, was that an artist, just like today, had a portfolio of things they knew how to draw. And they would draw a sword. Here is the sword, and it would be drawn in this way. And you would say, yes, that's the sword that I want. It looks like the sword that I like. But they would draw it that way no matter the situation, and it was always depicted like this. No matter the situation, it's always depicted as the most obvious version of the sword. Imagine trying to draw a sword from this position, from this way, where all you can see is the edge and the cross. It's like looking straight on at a bird. You can't really tell it's a bird anymore. That was stupid.
No, I like that.
But it's like looking straight. It's like when you're a kid and you draw a bird and you just draw two little humps because that's what it looks straight on.
Yeah.
But from the top, it's a hyper detailed bird. And for a manual that you're trying to sell off to a rich marquis or a rich count somewhere, you want it to look good and you don't want it to be confusing.
So another thing I think we need to consider about the manuals is who wrote them, why were they written, who were they written for, and how could they afford to do that?
Okay, so here at East Texas Historical Fencing, our primary focus is the flower of battle, Fiore di Liberi. And in the Paris, he specifically talks about in his preface how it was written. He explains who he is. He talks about his family history a little bit. He talks about all the experiences he's had. He's talked about duels that he's fought, students that he's trained. And then he repeatedly references this very specific marquis, this nobleman in some part of Italy, northern Italy, southern Austria, where he talks about this guy wanted to have a book written about fencing, so he hires Fiore to write down his knowledge, and then Fiore hires scribes, and this marquis funds this whole project for him. And then the Paris is one of the older ones, and we have a few more translations as well that they more or less all say the same thing, be it in a different order.
So Fiore himself couldn't have afforded to do this on his own?
He might could have afforded it, but what's important here is that in Italy, the way that a nobleman was made, especially at the time of the condottieri, was that unlike being born of royal blood, which was still a thing of noble blood, like there was enough money running around that a man could literally purchase his way into the nobility, which is, to be honest, how it always begins. But Fiore was kind of a minor noble. He was never like, like the king in a castle somewhere. He was always working for other people, even though he held the rank of nobility.
And so when this manual was created, was it something that like we had kind of talked about it before, it wasn't like common soldiers, Fiore going and being like, read my manual. It was limited and only a certain number of people had it.
Yeah, so this was very much for the nobility, both of his rank and greater than him. And his most notable student fought a notable Frenchman whose name escapes me at the moment, but his notable student was very wealthy and paid Fiore, and that's how Fiore made his living after his military days. And when he was an old man in the early 1400s, late 1300s, he had this manual written for the first time until his death in 1409.
And so on that, so was Fiore training people in the art of swordsmanship?
Yes, Fiore said that he spent 40 years both fighting and training multiple people of his rank and greater throughout his entire career.
So he was teaching them the stuff from the book, but he wasn't necessarily using the book like go home and read.
So they most likely had a system that they taught that we would understand as common fencing, and the book was his best attempt at conglomerating everything he could into a few small concepts. And then giving exemplars, both in the example of Largo plays and Stretta plays and poleaxe on the horse, grappling, the whole 9 yards. And those are meant to be exemplars of the concepts and the philosophies that he really wanted to teach us about sword fighting and fencing of the time.
And it would have been assumed that whoever soldier he was training would know most of the common fencing already.
Yeah, and we can see that in the manual, because when Fiore says, throw a cut in this way, step in this way, he assumes that you're going to step correctly. He assumes that you already know how to throw a cut, because what he doesn't say is, here's how you grip the sword. Here's what muscle groups you engage. Here's how you turn your hips. Here's that you cut before you step. You step before you cut. He never specifies that, and that's something that you only get from a basic understanding of fencing fundamentals. And without that basic understanding, a lot of times people will go through the manual and they'll create bad habits for themselves because they just don't know any better.
And from the other manuals that I've read, it's kind of the same way. Even in the German manuals, which do kind of focus on more of the common man, they're still not showing you. And this is how you hold sword.
No,
first
so
manual.
a lot of the KDF manuals are meant for the Festschule. They're meant for the fighting school. They're not meant for just anybody to pick up and read. And you have to think about at the time, who would have had access to books, who would have been able to read, things like that. Some random peasant's not going to be able to pick up the Flower of Battle and be like, yes, I'm going to go into the mountains and become a fight master when I come back down. That's not how that works. And so there was in a sense, you could gatekeep the nobility just by virtue of writing it down. Yeah. And by writing it down, it would be, that's it. That the only people who know how to read, which are, learned men, scribes, priests, and the nobility, and that's who studied fencing.
So because of how dense these manuals are in terms of the context we need to understand them, it almost seems like it would be better off for a new student or somebody who doesn't have a good understanding of fencing to go find a coach instead of trying to do it themselves and read these manuals.
So I think finding a coach for any endeavor is the best way to start a new thing that you've never done before. In regards to fencing, the manuals, like I said, they're written with an understanding that you already kind of know what's going on, and so you could almost make the argument that it's kind of pointless trying to read through them yourself, because most of the successful coaches that I know in successful schools started with at least some kind of experience, even if it wasn't fencing, if it was some sort of unarmed striking martial art, if it was some kind of dance, whatever it was, they had some kind of understanding of how both the body works and the way the body wants to move. And they have a superior understanding and a lens that they can read manuals through that just a regular person who's never done an athletic activity in their life will be able to understand.
This isn't, you can't learn how to fight from a manual.
Yeah.
Yeah, not alone. You need other stuff.
You need help. You really need help. And if you say that you don't need help, that's a very arrogant statement to make.
And so with that, a lot of the research and stuff that's been done in these manuals are historians who dig into these manuals who aren't even fighters, and there's enough stuff for them to dig through that it keeps them, we're still figuring stuff out.
Absolutely.
So if that's the case, I don't think that random guy off the street's gonna learn how to fence from Flower of Battle.
No, and the thing is, we wouldn't be where we were if there weren't for guys like Michael Chichester, who created Wiktenaur, for us to go through, and any manual you want is there on a PDF. It's free for you to read. You can donate if you want. But without him there looking things up, and without other translators, and without people literally digging through old libraries in Europe somewhere, finding new things, new resources, reading through unrelated letters and correspondence that we have, reading through Vatican art records, all those different things help us understand these manuals even better. And I would be a liar to say that I'm the one going through that. I read what these people write so that I can better understand how to be a better physical fencer. And I would say that if I didn't have those resources to read, I would not be as good as I am now.
Big shout out to Wiktenaur. There's going to be a link in the description of this video. Go check them out. Remember, if you're viewing this and you are not a fencer, you don't have the full context to understand them. So they're interesting as historical pieces, but don't go and try and learn from them. Get a coach. All right, so I definitely had an ulterior motive behind this video. Of course, everything we said was true and good, but I'm tired of people going onto Wiktenaur or just looking up a manual, finding one picture of somebody doing something that looks kind of like reverse grip, and then telling me that I'm wrong about everything. When usually, if they understood the context, they'd see that, oh, they've just disarmed somebody, or oh, they've thrown somebody in half sorting. So let's talk about some of the times the manuals are just silly.
Yeah, so there's a lot of times when it depicts, I guess you could call it reverse grip, where Fiore shows a few pictures in his manual, even from the mid-1300s. But later on, as we go through, we see very dueling specific long swords, you could call them, but they're weapons that were made for the sake of judicial dueling, or for the sake of entertainment, really. And they're crazy. They look kind of like long swords, but got big spikes here, and there's a place for your hand, and big crazy pommels, and then this side's got like a hammer on it, and they hold it like this, and they hold it like this, and sometimes they're doing this thing, or they're doing this thing. But the thing is that a sword? Is that a long sword? It's a very specific dueling weapon, is what that is. We see a lot of silly stuff. Like there's a depiction of a guy unscrewing his pommel and launching it at somebody. We see in Paulus Hector Mayer where he's fighting guys. They've got these guys fighting with a full-size scythe and full-size sickle. Those aren't weapons. Those aren't fencing weapons. And anybody who's ever been to a fencing event, it's 2 a.m., it's after the event, we're at the restaurant afterwards, and me and this other guy are over here with a couple of forks, because that's what we got, and we're like, yeah, look at this thing. That's what fencers do. We pick stuff up and we play with it.
And someone just wrote it down in a manual.
And there's no way to know that this was something that they did, they were just having fun. There's no way to know that for sure, but what we do know is guys like Talhofer wrote down what they saw because they thought it was cool. And there's a specific depiction of a little sword, and it looks like there's flames shooting out of the end and little red stuff coming out, and we thought, is this a doodle drawing? Is this just something that he drew? And through research, both inside the manual and outside the manual, we realized that that was some like one-off invention thing that was used in a parade and like shot fireworks out of it. But for the longest time, it looked like this crazy, like a middle schooler's, like if I had a sword, it would be spiky and it would be on fire and it would be awesome. But that's not what it was. It had a purpose, but it took outside research and a ton of context to be able to have a more objective view of what we're looking at.
Yeah, and context is the big thing there. If you just looked at that, you might think that there was a flaming sword. Another thing that you talked about before this video was that that medieval combat was not always to the death. There was an element of theater to it. There was an element of like, there was tournaments, there was duels that were very much for like, aha, look how fancy I am. Can you talk more on that?
Yeah, so modern Buhurt and armored combat is, weirdly enough, one of the most historical weapon martial arts that we have, because the rules are simply, there's more to it than this, but simply knock the other guy to the ground. And a lot of the dueling systems, a lot of the melees that happened during the Middle Ages and the early Renaissance, in the middle of the Renaissance, were these same rule sets. And they had armor that was designed for that. You would see lighter armor with holes drilled through it, and they would wear a surcoat or a tabard over it to cover it up, but it made it lighter, easier to breathe, because they're not really trying to kill each other anymore. This is more an athletic event. Jousting was a thing that people like to watch. It was entertaining. They would do like what they would depict as a night fight, where we would start with this weapon, then move on to the next weapon, do so many passes with this weapon, and sometimes people got hurt, sometimes they didn't, and maybe they really did hate each other, but in reality it was all in good fun. You could almost say that it was kind of like a medieval WWE, where you watch somebody take up a middle chair and just smack the other guy, and in the back of your mind, it's fake, but you don't care. You don't care. It was cool. I just watched a guy with a big old axe just beat this guy on the ground, and he's, oh, don't hit me anymore, and the crowd's screaming. That's why we're here. It's about the feeling, and we can't say that every manual was just that, but we know some things about some of the later manuals, and a lot of it was just depicting that activity, and attempting to use those to recreate a combat system is just kind of silly. But the only way that we know this is outside context and reading. And if you just pick these up and you look at them and you look at the picture and you think, oh, I can do that. And it's like, yeah, probably, if you had all that stuff, you had all that armor, but it's not what you think it is. And you don't know that unless you have a coach or someone smarter than you to ask.
And yeah, if you pick up a manual and you look at it and you see a guy unscrewing a pommel and thinking, yes, this is how they fought back in the day, instead of maybe like it was a grudge match where like, aha, oh no, there he goes unscrewing the pommel.
Yeah, and if you really want to take a look at some older Japanese art, and so there's some wild stuff in older Japanese art. There's a picture in particular where it shows a bunch of guys propelling themselves like rockets with flatulence, and you think that's just not how that works, and people just don't go around doing that, but they thought it was funny enough to draw. And if you just saw that picture and thought, this is what Japan's like, everybody in Japan does this now.
Well, and if you just looked at these manuals and these like manuscripts, not even the manuals, but just like old books, snails fighting knights was a huge thing.
Yeah, rabbits with helmets and bucklers, half snake, half person hybrids, snail people, all sorts of wild cryptids in the margins of books. We know that those things aren't real, but they depicted them anyway.
And we're not saying that the manuals are fake because of that, but we are saying that there is context that you and I don't understand because it's medieval memes. Medieval memes that we don't understand the context for anymore.
Humor never changes. They thought things were funny, we think things are funny. They doodled on the margins of pages, we doodle on the margins of pages. Humanity hasn't changed that much, and maybe the style of humor is different, but it's still funny, it's still humor.
Yeah, so in 1,000 years, when somebody finds my channel and they see that video that's gone viral of me getting shot in the butt with the thing, they're gonna think that was the height of combat.
That's right, they're gonna find hair dryers and think that we had laser guns.
Yeah.
They're gonna think that we melted people with tanning beds.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, they were gonna think that we were nuts. And
what are they gonna think about lolcats?
What?
Lolcats.
What are those?
Remember like in the 2000s when there was all the cats, the Me Wants Cheeseburger? Do you remember
I think I'm too young for that.
Oh. This is where we end the video.
They're gonna find Markiplier's E.
I'm keeping this in the video.
They're gonna find modern fashion trends like those big red boots.
Oh my
and think
God.
that's just something that people wear.
Dude, they're gonna find trip pants and they're gonna find Jinko jeans.
They're gonna find Jinko jeans.
Oh no!
They're gonna watch Fairly Odd Parents and think that Doug Dimmadome's hat was just another style of Western hat. That's just how hats
What's
look.
gonna happen is the fencing manuals of the modern day are gonna be, when they look back 1,000 years, they're gonna have all of us.
It's gonna be street sword.
Streets. Oh no!
It's gonna be street sword.
It's
gonna be the Cold Steel saber manual. Not Hutton, but the modern Cold Steel saber manual. All those YouTube videos that exist.
Oh no. Well.
It's gonna be Sellsword Arts.
Yeah, it's gonna.
Sellsword Arts is gonna be the Fiore of the 21st century.
They call me Sellsword Farts.
Smell sword farts.
Smell sword farts.
Sellout arts.
Sellout arts. Fiore. Yeah, that's what it is. But I want a rich noble. Someone, give me a rich noble so I can make a book. Sellout arts. I'm ready.